Hello everyone, my name is Marc Philipp. I'm a partner managing director with Kearney's Global Healthcare and Life Sciences practice. We're in Berlin today, in the very beautiful city of Berlin, with a very distinguished and special guest. It's Astrid Scherer from Bayer. Welcome, Astrid.
Thank you very much. Looking forward to have a conversation with you.
Perfect, wonderful. So a few sentences about your background. So Astrid is a pharmacist by training. She started her career at Scherer in the regional marketing organization responsible for Asia and Middle East. And then after the acquisition of Scherer by Bayer, she moved into various leadership roles in the combined Bayer Pharma organization, interestingly across quite a breadth of functions, right? So first in marketing, then in pharmacovigilance, then in medical affairs, and now you're a vice president at global clinical development and operations as part of the R&D organization and leading the product development and process excellence function.
Exactly.
Very, very excited to be with you today. And let's get started. I think when we prepared for this discussion, one theme that emerged was really the discussion around like the change in the narrative and in the kind of goal for R&D leaders. Historically being very much around kind of can we bring a product through to market authorization, and what's the probability of success to do this, and how can we maximize the probability of success in this. And nowadays we see a trend towards a changed narrative towards more commercial success. So even R&D leaders supposed to become responsible for not only bringing a product to market but also making it commercially successful, and then achieving not only marketing authorization but helping to achieve peak sales for that drug, for that innovation, right? So my question to you would be: after you've seen so many different parts of the value chain, what do you think what R&D should be doing differently in order to cater to this refined mission?
I think basically what is very important is to see what treatment area are you dealing with, and I think the market is quite saturated worldwide. Reimbursement systems, let's say, struggle with funding drugs, so you really need innovation, and you need to explain the innovation very early on. So of course here commercial comes into place, medical affairs with the access support comes into place, and of course clinical development. I believe, and what I see so far, is we work disintegratedly across the functions, and that needs to change. So I see clinical development next to regulatory affairs, next to medical, and next to commercial. And all of them have kinds of overlaps that, in my understanding, are still not organized enough and not strategically planned enough. So we need to understand how we pull patient, doctors, and access problems early on into the observation of how I build my clinical development path. And that is not happening structurally, but it needs to happen structurally, because basically the doctor in the clinic, even more, the one we talk to normally at this point in time, versus the patient is a different perspective. So what we normally do is we observe patients through market research, and we have certain connections to the patient, but I struggle to that we really understand what the patient problem is. Just an example, if we go into an acute care setting, I rather doubt that the person at the desk really understands what the problem is, as well as how we then can commercialize the drug. So it means that we have to observe this very early on, and most probably combine the forces a little more, and also spend more time with the external stakeholders like patients, doctors, PIs, etc. And here I believe we should do this much more structuredly, early on, and let's say build integration across functions and build integration across teams to make sure that we observe what we need to observe and not come to it sequentially after a long time and then see, okay, there's not a real match. Just to give an example, you go with a phase 3 trial into the market, and then you get other market observations, potentially market specific. And then we have to do a lot of amendments of the protocol. This is very costly, timely, and is not efficient. So this needs to come to the front. So feasibility will get a different, a more strategic cornerstone in the overall development.
So when we talk about this with leaders, there is obviously the narrative around patient centricity has been there for years, right, or for the last decade almost, and even the vehicles operationally to drive some of these integration efforts that you mentioned are there, such as integrated evidence planning, for example. In practice, as this is kind of a practitioner's discussion, what's the key roadblock that we need to solve in order to really bring these integration efforts further? As I feel that a lot of leaders have at least intellectually understood this, but are really struggling to embed this in their organization, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you can observe in patient centricity is a term potentially already overused in my view, but it is this meta level of patient centricity over real doing and integratedly approaching it early. So I think we are not early enough in my understanding in really understanding a patient need, which might also come if a patient defines problems of diseases differently over what are our trial endpoints at this point in time. There might be some disconnection, and we just need to integrate it. And this needs to happen earlier on, at least this is my observation. And it is, in fact, a network. And also the complexity of developing drugs becomes more and more difficult, and you need more and more stakeholders and specialized knowledge. Data science is another topic.
You mentioned also kind of that the therapeutic area you talk about is different, right? Like depending on whether you talk about general chronic diseases with like large patient populations, or whether you talk about rare disease and specialty treatments. You've worked on a number of different product categories. What do you think? What's the major difference across them in order to bring this, further translation integration to life?
So first of all, if you go into rare diseases, you don't know where the patient is. Often you have underdiagnosed numbers. The care across countries is very different. At least, for example, I worked in MS in Asia, not known at that time in the 2000s. So the understanding was not at all there, but the disease was there. So this is something you need to understand, where basically do your patients sit, and how do I then, as a practical example, you get them into a trial. So the logistics to a trial will entirely change. And to access those, most probably commercial can help you, because they have a network integrated into the entire world, be it sales offices, be it medical affairs, MSLs. Nice. So you need to think differently to access faster and to get to market faster. So, but we are not good at this, in my understanding, so far, and we really need to learn from each other. Just another example, we're just discussing master data in clinical trials. There's a duplication of master data in clinical development over commercial, together with medical affairs, most probably. So we also invest into the same aspect several times because we don't collaborate sufficiently.
So if we take your narrative further, and if we mirror this to the external world, to the stakeholder groups that are typically interacted with throughout the development and commercialization value chain, principal investigators, key opinion leaders, prescribers, do you also see there kind of lacking interdependence or lacking integration? Or it sounds like we're talking to those groups in a very siloed manner,
what we have done so far is we had our, let's say, hospital centers or clinics with the PIs or with the investigators. Then we basically walk through into what is the KOL network or thought leader network in the sense of who do I go first to train, let's say, prescribing and new drug availability into a market. And then I come to the prescriber. And this is clearly separated, and I would think the interconnection between KOLs and prescribers is there. but potentially investigators might be only part of the network. And again, there should be some integration early on, and most probably PIs are also prescribers. So it will be a smaller network of PIs, KOLs, prescribers, might be the same network of colleagues rather than basically being different pools of stakeholders.
Brilliant, yeah. So it sounds like there's a lot of kind of transformation effort necessary to bring that closer together. And in parallel, obviously, we have the discussion around what happens to portfolios of bigger or of mid-sized and bigger companies, right? With respect to, am I able to continuously bring innovation to market in light of my portfolio maturing and becoming, becoming off patent at a certain point in time? So am I able to synchronize new innovation with maturing product portfolios? And it sounds like a lot of organizations that we see today are faced by the ability to not necessarily always do that. So we always have these dips where companies are not able to bring innovation in the timely manner that is necessary and then need to go through tougher times, I would say. How do you manage these kind of tougher times from your experience? I guess you've been there and you've seen that. And how do you keep people excited about staying with an organization despite the fact that the science may be temporarily not as exciting as competing other industry players?
So I think one component I feel is very important is strategically plan through and also show that, let's say, if a portfolio is smaller at this point in time, that you grow it. And growing portfolio can be, and I personally believe a lot of a portfolio will be needed across so many diseases not being identified, not being diagnosed probably. So potentially rare diseases we discussed today will not be rare diseases in the future once you start to really diagnose them. So I think from a treatment innovation perspective, I personally believe there's a lot of potential. We just need to dare to tap into new areas to build them. As we have built a lot of chronic diseases in the last 20 years, which today seem commodity business, but they were not at all 30, 20 years ago. So I think this is something we should overcome and potentially also grab learnings from the past, because nobody who starts today might be motivated or dismotivated by certain portfolio situations in companies, or these dips as we call them. Tell them, okay, this is normally a kind of pathway of companies that many companies go through and then, let's say, overcome and then go through again. It's the cycle of a company, I would think, and you should stick to it and stand with it. And this is something, you build transparency into teams. This is one thing on portfolio, because portfolio, you can build it. It's strategic focus in my understanding, and also the explanation that we should be strategically focused on certain things. Because once you have a lot of money, you start to dilute, which then it's basically coming back to a strategic focus, which is the way to go. That's one thing. And the other one is give people freedom to operate. Some might need more freedom, others might need less, and then basically as we differentiate to treatment areas, we also need to differentiate people's needs and skills, and you always need to see and observe what does this individual and team, perhaps a key player, not so key player, how do I get persons to become key players into those teams and stick them there. I think for me, the equation is give them freedom to operate and train people to learn to operate in freedom. And then you, let's say, in my understanding, activate entrepreneurship in people, which is definitely something we need because we need to be faster ultimately than we used to be to remain competitive.
So less top-down, more decentralized, bottom-up, freedom to operate.
Yes, in my firm belief.
Perfect, super. So, and I guess if we take that people dimension not only to your teams but also to your peers, I could imagine especially the fact that you are a female leader is already creates a different dynamic in the boardroom. And we all know how these boardrooms still look like in major pharmaceutical companies with, like, you know, wooden floors and and very male-dominated traditional kind of behaviors. How do you behave in those kind of high-caliber governance meeting, boardroom situations, and what would you recommend? How should other female leaders behave? Do you face different expectations than your male colleagues, and how do you act on those?
Let's say, to be pretty frank, I think we see different expectations. My personal mix is persistence and delivery. While you deliver, you can speak out or speak up more, I would think. That's has always been my personal recipe, because ultimately what is value to the company, that is basically you deliver your programs. You have to deliver, and you agreed earlier. Then a second piece is that most probably a no should not be always a no. So you should try to investigate perhaps a little more, not basically a confrontational, but really think and reflect of whether this no is a negotiable no or it's a real no. Of course, if a no comes as a no. So it's basically this negotiating and reflection. What can I push in the sense of value generation? And this is something perhaps the female colleagues should start to reflect a little more upon, because ultimately you need your differentiator, and I think it's delivery combined with a certain persistence to push for value generation. Perfect. Does this make sense?
Absolutely. Wonderful. Thank you, Astrid, for having been here.
Thank you very much.
Really
Fun
appreciated
to talk.
The conversation.
Cool. Thank you.
Take care.